Greetings, Cleveland, and welcome to Creative Focus, the show that illuminates some of Cleveland's most talented and creative artists across the genres of film, dance, music, theater, and visual arts. I'm your host, Cornell Calhoun III, and I am thrilled to have as my guest today on Creative Focus, award-winning playwright, director, and performer, Mr. Eric Schmiedl.
Hey,
Eric, welcome to Creative Focus, man. Let's chop it up.
Oh, yes, it's a joy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. So, you have such an impressive resume, sir. BA from Kent State University, MFA from the University of Hawaii.
Rainbows.
Worked at numerous theaters in Cleveland and across the country, the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, Beck Center, Cleveland Playhouse, Cleveland Public Theater, Denver Center for Performing Arts, Idaho Shakespeare Festival, Lantern Theater, Caramoo, Great Lakes Theater, the Repertory Theater of St. Louis. Was Seth Gordon there when you?
Seth Gordon was there.
Seth
In
Gordon.
fact, we worked together there.
Great friend of mine.
Yes, he's
you
wonderful.
taught theater and playwriting at the Case Western Reserve, Cleveland State, BW. Just impressive, man.
I'm blushing.
And so many awards, including to me the big one. Finalists at the Eugene O'Neill National Playwriting Conference for your play, My Hemisphere, that you collaborated with your lovely wife, Adora.
Yep.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we go back about, I checked it, we go back about 14, 15 years at the Cleveland Playhouse. I had the privilege, of playing in your play Orange. I remember Terrence Spivey directed that. Remember we did that in a freight elevator.
I totally did.
Oh man, I love that play. Did you ever have it produced? Did you ever do anything with that play beyond the Fusion Fest?
So that play was originally created for Cleveland Public Theater's Pandemonium. And ironically, one of your earlier guests, Eric Coble, and I were in it. Eric and I and Billy Hoffman performed in it. And we did it on the second floor of the church space there on the campus of Cleveland Public Theater.
Wow.
And we had such a good time with it. And then when that opportunity came up with the Cleveland Playhouse, I offered it, and Seth Gordon, who was in charge of the new play program at the time, accepted it, and then it was such a joy that you and Terrence, and it was Kimberly Brown. Yeah.
Remember he flipped it because he had Kimberly. That's that genius, man. He had Kimberly play, and you didn't find out it was a woman until really later in the play. You know, I would love to do that play with my kids, man. I love that play.
Yeah.
What was the nature of it, just for the audience?
So it was a piece about, it was kind of a riff a little bit on Waiting for Godot. So there's three kind of transient folks on a train going someplace. And two of them are arguing about what they think this thing is on top of a Coca-Cola can. It looks like they're trying to figure out what exactly it is, and it's actually an orange. And they're riffing on it, and they're going all over about all these wonderful things, and it's kind of an exploration about imagination and reality and perception. And then one of the third character who wakes up kind of freaks out about the whole thing and throws it. They think it might be a bomb, and so he throws it off the train, and they all look, and it doesn't explode. And then there's the can is still there, and the other two go to sleep, and the one guy that was really trying to figure it out lifts up the can, and there's another orange underneath it.
Yeah, that's just a fantastic play. And I need you to send me that script.
Oh, of course, it'd be an honor.
Script. So, where did all this artistic brilliance come from? I need to have you on more often so some of it can rub off on me.
Well, no, you're rubbing off on me. So I was really lucky. My father was a dye maker. He was a blue-collar guy, and grew up on the west side of Cleveland, the near west side. My mother grew up in Cleveland Heights on the east side, so they were kind of like the Romeo and Juliet of Cleveland. Love blossomed over the Cuyahoga River. He worked in a small tool and die shop on the near west side, but then he took a job in Twinsburg at the Chrysler stamping plant. So we moved when I was a kid out to Aurora because it was close to the stamping plant. And Aurora had a community theater at that time. So from a very young age, I had a wonderful neighbor, Mrs. Rassin, who took me to see my first play when I was 6 years old. We went to see a children's theater piece at Kent State University. And I remember distinctly walking in there, watching the production. I just fell in love. And from then on, I was like, I want to work in this area for the rest of my life. And so I was lucky because they had a youth theater as a component of that community theater there. And the community theater is still running. And there's a component of the youth theater that's still there too. And so from a very young age, I think my first production was Snow White when I was in 5th grade. So I would have been 10 years old. And from then on, I worked on those productions all summer. I would wait for the summer and work as an actor. And then as I got older and in college, I was able to do some directing and music directing. And so that's where I kind of really fell in love with theater.
So did you start directing before you started writing?
I did. So I started because I didn't know, I'm a blue collar kid. I didn't know anything about it. I just knew I loved theater. Right. So I knew you went into the theater and you did stuff. So I started as an actor and then got opportunities to kind of direct things. And I was really inspired. I don't know if you remember this, but the Royal Shakespeare Company did an adaptation of The Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby in the early 80s. And there was a very famous PBS taping of the New York production of it. And I saw that and was blown away. I was a senior in high school when it happened. And I just loved that combination of narrative theater with drama happening at the same time. So that community theater allowed me to do an adaptation of Oliver, the musical Oliver. So we went back and I pulled out text from the novel and interspersed it with the music from the musical. And so kind of created a whole new script for it. And that was kind of one of my first times of playwriting and learning that you could do this and make these things up all on your own and it could actually happen. And then was blessed because I got to see it performed. And so you could see how that whole process goes from writing to all the things you need to do when you start to add all the wonderful other artists that happen in theater.
I'm almost certain that my late professor, Reuben Silver, played in what is it again?
Nicholas Nickleby, The Life and Adventures. Could be. There were only, to the best of my knowledge, there were only 2 productions in the United States. The one that was in New York with the RSC company, and then Great Lakes under Gerald Freeman did it here in Cleveland. And it was in Cleveland and Chicago. Then they toured it to Chicago.
I'm gonna have to do some research, but I think Reuben did play in that production.
It would make sense.
Yeah, it would make sense. I think so. So do you have a preference in terms of directing, acting, playwriting, or they all just kind of run together?
They do. Well, I'm like you. You do it all. You do it all. And so I've just been blessed that I've gotten a chance to do all kinds of different areas of theater as a freelance artist. I'm also a full-time daddy, so I've for the past 20 years, our oldest son is 20 years old, I've had to kind of juggle both. So when they were really young, it was much easier to write because I could work around their schedules, and I didn't have to be in a theater space all the time. And in fact, I was very scared. Our oldest son, Zeke, used to love those slings. You remember they had baby slings? And so my whole process was I'd get him into a nap and he'd fall asleep and then I'd do my writing. But then he got old, he got too big for the thing. So I would just try and shove him in there because I was afraid the magic would stop if he wasn't in that process. And then as I got older, it gave me some more freedom to be able to do rehearsals. And so then I directed more. And recently I've been doing a lot more performing, which has been a joy. So in terms of playwriting, how difficult is it to do adaptations? I mean, I love that you asked that question.
And what is the challenge? What is the challenge in that?
Yeah, I think theater from its inception in the West has always done adaptation because one of the biggest things we got to get people in the theater to see stuff. So Oedipus is an adaptation of a Greek story. So. The story's right there. People know, oh, this is going to be that play about Oedipus. I want to see what happens with Oedipus on stage. So it makes sense that we do a lot of adaptation in theater. I was inspired actually at Karamu House. One of my first jobs out of undergrad was working in the touring company at Calhoun House that did children's theater productions. And I fell in love with that genre. And so my graduate work was in the area of playwriting and children's theater at the University of Hawaii. And children's theater, for right or for wrong, is really steeped in adaptation. It makes sense because it's a good way to market the pieces that you do, because teachers who are often the gatekeepers for that art and parents are familiar with titles. So I started doing a lot of adaptation, and then that just kind of carried over to other areas of theater. When I was at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival, I was hired to do an adaptation of a wonderful novel by Lee Smith called Fair and Tender Ladies. And then later on at the Denver Center Theater Company, I did adaptations of 3 different Kent Harif novels. And the process, Cal, is very much like playwriting if you're doing an original story, except you've got to find your way into the story. So for me, what I try and do is find what the heart of the piece is, what I think the heart of the story is. And then that'll usually tell you what the bones of the piece need to be, what are the key moments in the story that need to be included. Because often if you're working with a piece that's larger, the novel, say working with a novel, it's much too big to fit into the confines of a 2-hour, 2 to 3 hour piece. So you have to figure out what parts you're going to cut out and what parts you're going to keep. If you know what the heart of your piece is going to be, then you can hang on to those bones, and those will be kind of the structure of your play. And once you have that structure, it kind of informs you about the most important part, I think, and that's the theatrical vernacular of the piece, the way you're going to tell it. So in the case of the Adventures of Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby, that's a very narrative piece. So the theatrical vernacular for that is audience speaking directly to the actors speaking directly to the audience, and then slipping into the different parts of the drama of the story.
You wrote a piece that we're going to take a look at. You actually wrote and performed a piece called The Cardiac Kid.
Ah, yeah.
Let's take a look at that, and then we'll discuss it.
Sure.
While back in Cleveland on West 88th Street, Eddie bolts up the stairs to puke in the toilet while his son sits wide-eyed before the fine wooden cabinet of their color RCA. The ball sits frozen on the Oakland 13. The Browns are down by 2. It is second down. The Oakland Raiders line up in their nickel defense, expecting the Browns to call a running play, expecting the Browns to set up a game-winning field goal. Quarterback Brian Sipe starts to leave the Browns sideline when head coach Sam Ratigliano grabs him, tells him one last thing. Sipe nods and returns to the huddle. From up in the NBC booth, John Brody sees Cleo Miller and predicts a run play. But the Browns line up with 2 wide receivers, Dave Logan on the left, Reggie Rucker on the right, with tight end Ozzie Newsome flexed. There are 49 seconds left on the clock. 49 seconds left in this sudden death AFC playoff game. 49 seconds left to continue this miraculous season of the Cardiac Kids. 49 seconds. Sipe walks up to the line. From the Browns sideline, Lyle Alzado recognizes a play and screams, "What the hell are we doing?" The ball is snapped. Logan crosses over the middle to the right corner. Reggie Rucker and Ozzie go to the left. The linebackers crash through on a blitz when Sipe does what he's done this whole season, his whole career. He cocks the ball back and throws when everything stops.
So I take it that you are a big Browns fan. Is that how that came about?
Yeah, you know, my mother was a huge Browns fan. She grew up in a family of all boys. She had 3 brothers. And my father grew up in a family, his father died when he was young, so his mother moved back and lived with her 2 sisters. So he grew up in a family of all women, and the women were into baseball but not football. But my mother was totally into football. So my father, to this day, God bless him, I love you, Dad, but he doesn't know a whole lot about football. But my mother was a huge football fan. So she and I watched the Browns through the Cardiac Kids, the Bernie years. We wept. I was actually in Alabama when the Browns left. So in honor of her, you know, we followed that Cardiac Kids team like many Cleveland. You're a Clevelander, so I mean, we followed that team like and hung on to that team and all of those the ups and downs of that 1980 season like crazy. She went out herself to Peaches Records and Tapes and bought the 45 of Cardiac Kid Christmas. Remember that?
Right, yeah.
The first day of Christmas.
Right, yeah.
Raymond Bobkin at Cleveland Public Theater very generously gave me the opportunity to explore this idea of the connection between community and a professional sports team and how that bond builds and what it does, how a team can affect in a positive sense all the complexities of a community. And so that was the initial germ of that. So the story is told it's one storyteller, but he steps into 5 different stories all around the region and how they intersect with with that 1980 football team, the Cardiac Kids. And you know and he also relates key moments of those games. You know, so there's this one moment in that I just love in that season when the Browns were playing the Packers. It's the middle of the season and they're like playing at 500, so they really need to win this game so that they can get above and start to lead in the Central Division. And it was a muddy game. It was back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the last drive, the last minutes of the last drive, and it was the old Municipal Stadium,
right,
so that field was just muddy,
yeah,
right? And so they go, it's like 3rd and I think it's 3rd and 8 or something, and the play call was to go down the middle to Reggie Rucker and set up a field goal because the Browns were down by 1 point, and it was less than a minute on the clock. So they go to the line, and that's the call. To go to Reggie Rucker down the middle. He's going to flip down the middle. And the team lines up, and Sipe goes to the line, and he sees that the Packers are in a massive blitz. They just have the whole defense on the line. And he looks over to Dave Logan, and if you remember, Dave Logan was like 6'4".
Yeah.
And the back against the defensive back against Logan was 5'10". So he just looks to Logan and he sees that and he nods to Logan and Logan looks to him and nods to him and the play changed. They immediately knew, the 2 of them, but nobody else knew. Like nobody on the line, nobody on the sideline, nobody it was a packed stadium.
Right.
So the ball gets snapped, he goes back quickly and Sipe throws this like loopy ball, and it's great, you can see it on YouTube. This loopy kind of pass that just kind of hangs there, and Logan leaps up, catches it, and then like gallops into the end zone. And the team goes crazy, and the stadium goes crazy. Of course, my mom and I went crazy in our little living room.
I had a bit of nostalgia watching because that January 3rd, 1980 game against the Raiders. I was actually working at Greyhound at the time, and I had a TV down in the basement. I was doing payroll, and I watched that game, and I mean that was like crazy,
right?
Crazy.
So one of my favorite parts of doing that play, Cal, was after the performance, I would spend 20 minutes, an hour talking to people because everybody had a story. And my favorite story was, and then I'll stop about that. But my favorite story was there was a guy, is a friend of my wife's, and he was in junior high school for the game, and his father landed tickets. He didn't know how he landed those tickets, but he got the tickets. And it was cold, right?
Yeah.
It was
super cold.
And this guy did not want to be at the game, and it was freezing, and he was crying. He was like, and so his father just got fed up, and at halftime went, "Fine, we're leaving, we're going home." And they drove home, and his father pulled the car in the garage, and the boy, he was a boy then, ran into the house to warm up, and his father sat in the garage the whole time to listen to the rest of the game on the radio. and then never talked that night.
Wow, that's crazy. So, what is it like to see your characters come to life? Something that you've created, something that you've written. What is that like?
Well, you know this. It's really magical that, the thing that I love about theater and continues to inspire me is the collaborative nature of it. So it's such a joy to be able to think of something and then share it with a bunch of other wonderfully talented artists and see how they take their own, they use their talents and their brilliance to make new things and discover new things. And, it's really, in many ways, I feel a writer's and performer's medium, because it's live and it happens. The writer she might give the words, but it's also the performer that then has to interpret those words every night and interact with an audience, because it's a communication with an audience. That's when all the magic happens.
Why do you think theater is important?
Well, for that very reason. It's about human interaction and human communication. And we're at such an interesting time, I think, right now with the performing arts and theater in particular, because of the pandemic and because of the discussions that are happening around race and culture and performance and discussions, I think theater is going to evolve in the next 5 to 10 years in new ways as a result of that. In part because of the pandemic, where people comfortable in public settings again? Are people, I think, because we spent a period of time isolated, there's a yearning to be together, but yearning to be together in different ways. And so I think that's going to shape the way theater forms and how theater is accessed by audiences and shared and created by artists and audiences. So I think this is a really exciting time, and our new understanding of, well, not new, but our there's sort of new awakening or opening of discussion about race and culture, and opening up avenues, hopefully, for artists, for new artists of all different cultural backgrounds and all different ages to kind of create. And I hope that will enable us to kind of create a new identity and a new voice specifically for American theater.
Do you have a preference, comedy or drama? I'm a straight drama man.
I don't. I think the story is the thing that really that's a joy, and sometimes that story needs to be serious. I will say this though: I recently worked one of the first productions to go up after we started to take steps as the vaccines went out, the summer of 2021. The Beck Center and Scott Spence very kindly gave Deirdre Ring and I the opportunity to work on this wonderful play by a Irish playwright called This Girl Laughs, This Girl Cries, This Girl Does Nothing at All. It's a beautiful piece that we did as a one-person piece, and Deirdre was brilliant.
One person? Though.
Yeah. And it was really, the thing that's so beautiful about the piece is about 3 different sisters, and something tragic happens, and they all make different decisions, but eventually they come together, and it's a sort of a reaffirmation of life. And that sense of hopefulness is something I hope to continue to embrace with new work.
What do you enjoy most about your work?
The interaction with artists. It's all about collaboration. So the opportunity to find new ways to solve problems together, to learn from other artists and see what their point of view is, and kind of contribute to that. That's really the joy, and really keeps it alive, because it's something new, and new artists come in and have new ideas, and I can learn new ways of doing art.
What do you think the greatest challenge lies for a playwright today? What would you say?
I think that, as I said, I think that this is a really interesting time in the creation of theater. So I don't know that we're necessarily going to go back to theater that was created. The New Play Project process in the new plays come to life in a whole bunch of different ways. But the process that was most often used through the middle part of the 20th century into the 21st century was that workshop model, where you would find a play that a theater might find a play that they're interested in. They'd gather some actors and a director, they'd workshop it, and then present it on their stages as a workshop, maybe as a full production. I don't know if that process, I think that workshop process will probably still happen, but I don't know if the access point is going to be the same. And so I think that's the challenge, is to find out how do we make theater, how does theater stay relevant to people's lives and become, continue to be part of the conversation with where the culture is right now.
You wrote a play entitled Evident?
Eventide, I think.
Eventide. Eventide, okay. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Eventide, I think, is the play that you're referencing at the Denver Center Theater Company?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So there's a wonderful novelist named Kent Harif. It's a great story. So Kent was originally from Colorado, and he was a writer, and he wrote, like many of us working in our regions, he had success, but not on a big national sense. He was very, very well noted in his area. And then he wrote a novel called Plain Song. And Plain Song is a beautiful novel it's about this, he always set his novels in a mythical town called Holt in the eastern plains of Colorado, which is a flat ranching area.
Right.
And it was about all the people in this, about five different stories in this small little town. And one of the main stories were two old ranchers kind of surrogate adopt a young woman who's pregnant, and she has her baby, and they just make this really unusual family, and it's just a lovely story and a reaffirmation of the human spirit, and that people can come together and make something beautiful. And it got wonderful reviews. It did okay, and then Oprah picked it up and put it on her book list.
Wow.
And he all of a sudden went from novelist to novelist with a capital N. And it became a bestseller. And so the Denver Center Theater Company, under Kent Thompson at the time, got the rights to produce that, to adapt it into a novel. And so
that was one of your adaptations.
That was that was the first one. And so Kent and I worked on that, Kent Harif and Kent Thompson, and I worked on that first one, and it was a wonderful experience. It was very successful, and Kent Harif, the novelist, and I got to be buddies. He was a Denver Broncos fan, and so I was so we had a rivalry. And it was cute because he would call me up on Sunday, and the Broncos would have lost, and he'd be like, "Eric, I don't know what it is, but I didn't do anything, but I feel like I'm terrible. I feel bad because they lost." And so we used to laugh about that. So his novel after Plain Song was Eventide.
Eventide.
And so the Denver Center Theater Company produced that. It's set. It's about 5 different stories set in Holt. And then the last novel he wrote was called, second to last, was called Benediction. That was the third of the plays that we did. And the kind of poignant piece about that was one of the main storylines in Benediction is, in the small town, there's a hardware store owner, and that hardware store owner, at the beginning of the novel, finds out that he has terminal cancer. So the novel's about him coming to terms with different points in his life, and then he passes away at the end of the novel. Gorgeous story, and we did a workshop of it, and the theater committed to producing it, and then Kent passed away. Kent Harif, the novelist, just as we were getting into rehearsals for the main stage production. So that piece was particularly touching for the company and for all of us.
Okay, so let's take a look at that.
Eventide. This will be Eventide?
Yes, Eventide.
I'm gonna tell you what these kids want. They want discipline. Always out there to the gas and go, stealing food. I know what these kids want. We're about to set things straight here. Isn't that right, Joy Ray? I'll tell you what. You're not hungry? Why don't you make yourself useful and clean up these plates? You think you can do that? Wait. Now, you were asked a question. Do you think you can clean up these plates?
Yes.
Yes, what?
Yes, sir.
All right then. That's better.
But I'm worried about
you?
I'm still a pretty tough old bird.
No, you're not. You just had your cast taken off. You're still limping.
Well, maybe a little.
And Mr. Guthrie stopped coming out to help you like he was before.
I told him to. I can manage myself now. He'll come back again when I need him. You've got to go on, honey. It's all right now.
It feels like you're trying to get rid of me.
No, now don't you even think like that. You'll come back in the summers and all the holidays between now and then. I expect you to. I'd be upset if you didn't. Victoria, you and me, we're bound together the rest of our lives. Don't you believe that?
Wow. Great work, man. Great
Thank
work, you know. So you were also a very well-respected director. Talk about directing Eric Kobel's Velocity of Autumn that featured my illustrious mentor, the First Lady of Cleveland Theater, Dorothy Silver. What was that like?
Oh, it was a joy. I mean, it was an honor. I was and continue to be a huge fan, and you know, I think all artists in Cleveland. I know you were touched by Dorothy, and not only her generosity, which was huge, but also the breadth of her theatrical knowledge about Cleveland theater, about theater in general, was phenomenal. So one of the joys of that piece was that we spent a good part of the early section of our rehearsal period at her place. Reuben was ill, so it was easier for us to do some of the table work and some of the initial discussions about the piece at their apartment. And so we were actually working in their office, and she had all of her theater history. You know, we're theater artists, so we have nothing else except the pictures and the programs and the posters. And so I could pick her brain, you know, and breaks, I'd be like, hey, so tell me about this poster right here. What happened here? And she just, you know.
Was that the apartment on Van Aken?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Because I remember they moved from Cleveland
Cleveland
Heights,
Heights,
and that's where she and I would brainstorm about certain pieces, and my piece, Laurel.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So she was just incredible. She would come to rehearsals when I was performing at Cleveland State, and Reuben was the director, and she would just sit in the back, and she would never say anything. And then the next day, we would run up to Reuben and say, Reuben, what did Dorothy think? What did Dorothy think? And he would always look at us and say, you know, you got to keep working, but she was just a joy.
Yes,
a joy.
And weren't they a lovely partnership too? Because they worked together so well, because he was such a big personality and vibrant and loud, and Dorothy was much more regal and very intellectual, tough as nails. Also, though, both of them were both, you know, very strong, tough people, but so different in their styles and techniques. It was just a joy.
You know, I wrote a piece for them, The Strangest Romance, and we performed it during the scholarship awards at Cleveland State, and then we also did it at Cleveland Public Theater. It was just a short 10-minute play. I had the joy of doing that with them. Hey, so let's talk about your performing. Let's talk about the welcome table with my friend Tina Stump and Bob Hoffman. How did that come to be?
Well, it's actually, we have Cleveland Public Theater to thank for that. So, you know, Cleveland Public Theater does this wonderful program in support of Station Hope, you know, the last stop on the Underground Railroad. And Raymond put a call out for performance pieces for the very first Station Hope. And so I approached Mr. Hoffman and Ms. Stump and said, they're both buddies and I love them to death, and said, hey, what if we do a piece where we include a little bit of monologues, but then, you know, Tina's a gorgeous singer, and Billy's got a beautiful voice. So they both said yes, and so we did this piece for Welcome Table. For Station Hope, and we called ourselves the Welcome Table because
Right.
one of the songs that we fell in love with was the Welcome Table.
Got you.
The old gospel song, and then we kind of enjoyed being together, so we just started rehearsing, and then we got some more gigs, and then we were very generously offered opportunities like y'all gave us.
Food Truck
to do
Friday,
Food Truck
yeah.
Fridays, and so we just did. Billy runs Mr. Hoffman runs a wonderful program called the Reading Company with Project ACT, where families who are experiencing homelessness come, right now they come to Public Square to the Westfield Theater once a month. They do he hires a bunch of actors, a team of actors, and they perform songs about literacy, and then it ends with reading a sort of theatrical reading of a book, a picture book that is then given out to all the participants that are there. So Tina and I performed just a week ago.
Okay.
And then the Welcome Table did Christmas carols. It was a Christmas themed thing, so we did Christmas carols.
Yeah, I
so
love-
we continued to perform.
Yeah, I love Tina. She and I went to grad
Amazing.
school together. She is an amazing woman, amazing artist. So let's take I have a clip. Yeah, I got a clip.
The Welcome
of the
Table.
Welcome to
Oh, that's
Table.
great.
Let's take a look.
Thank you.
I love it. I love it. Now I want to talk about your newest work. We had mentioned it in the beginning of the show, My Hemisphere, and you collaborated with your lovely wife, Adora. Talk about that a little bit.
So Adora and I met at Carmel House. I had mentioned that one of my first gigs out of undergraduate school was in the touring company at Carmel House.
Was Margaret Ford Taylor there at the
Was,
time?
yes, it was under her administration at that time.
Okay.
And Adora was she was an advisor on one of the stories. So we did a collection. The piece that we toured was a collection of folk tales from different cultures. We were a multicultural group, and we did one of Adora's stories. Now, Adora has a fascinating personal journey. Her father was from Nigeria. He was of the Igbo tribe, and he met Adora's mother here in the United States. Adora's mother was Polish-American from Cleveland, and they got married and lived in D.C. So Adora was originally born in D.C., but when she was 9 years old, her father decided he wanted to go back home and allow his kids, he had 3 children at the time, including Adora, to experience Nigeria, the Igbo land that he had experienced. And he had a whole plan of helping farmers run their farms as small businesses. He had a master's in economics. And so he moved the whole family back. So she went from this little urban kid in Washington, D.C. to live with her paternal aunts in a village, the village where Joseph grew up, with no running water, cooking on a cooking fire. Everybody spoke Igbo. They didn't speak English. English was spoken, but mostly pidgin English. So she had to learn Igbo.
How old was she then?
9 years old. And so she spent most of her childhood then in Nigeria. She came back here to go to college. She came back to the States to go to college. So Adora and I met then at Carmel House. Adora ran the tour, and she shared one of her stories, and we performed one of Adora's stories. So then love blossomed, and she and I got married, and we've now been married for 30 years. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yes, he's awesome. It's always fascinated us that we literally grew up in different hemispheres. So she was in West Africa, and I was a Cleveland kid. I was growing up in Cleveland, and we're about the same age. And we grew up at the same time, but in totally different environments. And then, through the years, we met.
Right.
So this play, My Hemisphere, is about that idea that there's two kids, one boy in Cleveland and a girl in West Africa in a small village, in the summer of 1977, which was kind of an epic summer. There was a lot of stuff going on, least of which was the death of Elvis. Remember Elvis died in 1977?
Exactly.
So there were a lot of cultural things happening. And it explores the summer for those two kids and what was happening with them, and kind of explores the intersections. We chose to do it, we talked about theatrical vernacular. We chose to use just 3 performers and embrace, Adori's a storyteller. And so we embraced the narrative voice. So the 3 actors tell the stories of these two kids, and they play all the different characters throughout there. So there's a lot of really interesting intercultural stuff going on, because that's part of the piece too, is the intersections of cultures, like what things are similar, what things are wildly different between Igbo, West African culture, and white Eurocentered American culture that I grew up in. And we find those different parallels and the differences, and eventually, through the course of the piece, they come together.
A lot of people don't realize that is extraordinary to be a finalist at the Eugene O'Neill National Playwriting Conference. Yeah. I mean, sometimes they get over 1,600 plays. I've been a semifinalist 3 times. I've never been a finalist. That is just extraordinary work, Eric. I'm so proud.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was, and it's, and we continue to. This is kind of a side project for Adora, right. So we continue to work on it. And we've been blessed with a lot of wonderful actors. Lisa Langford, our own Lisa Langford here in Cleveland, has been with the project as we've developed it with different theaters.
So when are you going to plan to do it in Cleveland, or what's
love to. So I just need to. So the next step, we did a workshop. Most recently, we did a workshop at the Denver Center Theater Company.
Okay.
So now we kind of have to figure out what the next step for the piece is.
Gotcha.
I think we probably need another workshop of it before we get to a full production of it. Because I think the next step is to continue to explore the Igbo-ness of it and the American-ness of it, and how that storytelling happened, how that influences some of the storytelling.
No, I can't wait to see it, to read it. Okay. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Cal, thanks for having me over.
Anytime.
This is wonderful.
So that's it, Cleveland. We're out. But remember, a true artist is not only inspired, but inspires others. I'm Cornell Calhoun for TV 20 and Creative Focus. Until the next time becomes our time, be well, be safe.